Well, welcome to everyone. Welcome to this launch of Artizein, Arts and Teaching Journal. It's the 2020 issue, Volume 5, Issue 1. I'm Barbara Bickel, and I'm with my co-editor, Darlene St. George, and we are co-hosting this launch. This is the second of two launches. Some of you may have been at the first one, and this was a large issue, and we have two sections in it. So the editorial process and design of this Artizein took place on Alberta lands in Canada. And right now we invite you, wherever you are, to take a moment to silently acknowledge the ancestors and keepers of the land that you're living on. And I'll pause for you for a moment right now just to do that. And then Darlene's going to share an acknowledgement of the traditional territories of Alberta where Artizein was created, because both Darlene and I live in Alberta.
Thank you. Oki, welcome. We are on the traditional territories in Alberta of many First Nations, Métis and Inuit, whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. In southern Alberta, we are located on Treaty 7 territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which include Kainai, Piikani, and Siksika First Nation, Stoney Nakoda. The University of Lethbridge's Blackfoot name is Iniskin, meaning sacred buffalo stone. We honor the Blackfoot people and their traditional ways of knowing and caring for this land, as well as all Aboriginal peoples who have helped shape and continue to strengthen our communities. We also acknowledge that the city of Calgary is homeland to the historic Northwest Métis and to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. I would also like to acknowledge the Métis Nation of Quebec, of whom I am a community member. Thank you, and I'll pass it over to Barbara.
Right, I am just typing in a link to the journal if you would like to follow along and look at the issue while you're in there.
Thank you.
So Artizein, just to tell you a little bit about it, is an open access blind peer review publication produced at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. The journal seeks to enlarge and shift the current professional domains of visual art, teaching, inquiry, and learning with the renewed examination of what is possible through an expansive interdisciplinary lens that includes not only visual art, but all of the creative arts. The overseeing journal editors are myself, Peter London, and Laurel Fredrickson. This issue was co-edited with guest editor, associate editor Darlene St. George, and myself. And the beautiful design of the journal, of the cover raven, which you're seeing there, was a creation work done by Darlene. And right here, you're seeing the list of the 24 editorial board members that serve as the reviewers. You're getting a quick look here at their names, and they're located in both the US and Canada. And tonight, we're really delighted to have 9 of the contributors with us this evening. They will each offer a 5-minute taste of 6 different articles with the hope that you'll spend time reading the full piece later. After we hear from all of the chapter presenters, we'll have a short amount of time for questions and comments. And please add your questions and comments that you'd like to be brought forward into the chat box at the end. And I'm going to be monitoring them, and I'll bring them forward at the end for those of you that are attending. And we'd also like to note that we are recording this. It will be made available later, just to let you know that. And to ground us for this evening together, we know we spend a lot of time on Zoom. We've invited Celeste Nazali Snowber, who is a writer and a poet, dancer, and a scholar, to offer a grounding and a blessing for us for this time that we're together this evening. So I'd like to turn it over to Celeste.
Thank you, Barbara. Welcome, everyone. And I would invite you to just put your feet on the ground if you can. To feel wherever you are sitting, to feel your spine long, your jaws dropped, and just to take a deep breath. And I invite you to take a big deep breath and a sigh. And you can Raise out your arms to just to stretch them out wherever you are and you're seating. And I'm just going to have you just pat your arms so like you're waking up your lymph system. And pat your thymus gland and just shake out a little bit. Just shake any kind of stress. You need about 5 more hours to shake the stress, but this will have to do. And take a deep breath and soften. And I want to read you a body psalm to dare to create. Write what you dare not write. Create what you dare not create. Places hidden in your bones where longing and aches reside. Your dreams long to arrive to be massaged to birth. Throw your critic out. Let it reach into the recycling bin where it transforms to compost. For the wonder of your own stories, honor your tears, joys, and disappointments. Only mourn for not showing up, for your deep truth and beauty, where health and wholeness celebrate each thread of life. Listen to the impulses of your fingers, agitation in your feet. Spread wide your toes to touch the ground and sky, the garment of your own yearning. This is yoga toes for writing, dancing, painting, living, breathing into the unknown. Let your discomfort be a sign. You are not going where you have not gone, to an all-inclusive of what is possible. Show compassion towards yourself. Fall free to the winter of your own passage. Know you are called to only be real to whom you are. This alone is enough. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Celeste. Wonderful way to begin.
Thank you.
So Darlene and I would like to now begin by offering some insight into our editorial process and share some words that are in our editorial intro in the journal, which we entitled Curating as Compassion. Editors, similar to curators, have a significant role to play in what is published and how authors and artists are held as the blustering winds of the publication and exhibiting process unfolds. In the prior 2 issues of Artizein, guest editor Susan Walsh and myself described our editing process as a feminist, relational, co-evolving model of generative peer dialogue. This newest issue builds upon that feminist relational model and swerves it toward curating with care and compassion for restoration and transformation. The definition of the word curator includes one who cares for, care for the collection of art and writings in this issue in an aesthetical and ethical relational paradigm includes care for both the creation and the creator. In conversations with the authors during the editing process, one shared that this way of curating a journal is a needed alternative to the traditional gatekeeper role of the editor in academia. We believe that the reader, the viewer, and listener of the offerings in this issue will also be impacted by the field of care that was established in the full editing process. And Darlene's going to share a little bit more on that curatorial process.
Thank you. Submissions went through the traditional blind peer review, but once accepted, the authors worked closely and in dialogue with us, the editors. We at times restored and at other times transformed their pieces. Leslie Sotomayor, a contributor to this issue, used the term curator to describe the actions of an educator who is creating, implementing, and sharing a pedagogical approach that centers on co-creation of knowledge with care and stewardship. We echo her description and share below the steward process that we engaged as editors of this issue in a manner that contemporary feminist curators describe as taking care to power.
So our foundational tenets included a gift economy as a foundation for building a creative scholarly circle of care, criticality, and connectivity, the inclusion of emerging, mid, and mature scholarly and creative contributors, a relational ontology, not being in denial of the time of atrocity we are living in, addressing aesthetics first, with ethics emerging from the aesthetics, and lastly, politics, with a return to aesthetics at the end of the process.
And this process included, as Barbara stated earlier, editor not as gatekeeper, but as nurturer of the individual and their story. Curatorial mentoring with development of the capacity of artist, author, and bringing forward the aesthetic and academic strength of each article, poem, essay, or visual essay. And lastly, keeping the current issues and contexts relevant for the artist teacher working in today's world.
And now let's begin to hear from the authors, artists themselves. So we're going to open with our first presenter, who is Marna Hauk, and her co-author was Amanda Rachel Kippen, who is unable to be with us tonight, but Marna is going to present for her.
Awesome. Welcome. Glad to meet all of you in the interwebs, and really grateful to present our research, which is a meta method of how to work with arts-based research materials in a creative, collaborative, arts responsive way. So what I wanted to just invite you to do while we're exploring this is to take your hands, if you're in and as you're able and willing, and put them at the periphery of your vision until you can't really see them anymore, and then pull them in until you can just barely see them. So that edge, that verge of perception, thank you, is what we're going to be exploring, what this research method is exploring. And my research data was a pile of art workings and insights from participants in a year-long eco-social incubator for climate change, community climate change visionary activists. And Rachel had a bunch of data and participant experience she was looking at from a walking research in the Monterey Bay area. And so we were interested in kind of seeing how could we be each doing our kind of sense making together in a way that was further generative. And so we thought about this idea of being on the verge of something, being on the edge. And Ed Casey actually has a method called the glance for more arts-based perception, where you just kind of really working on the edges of what we're seeing and not able to see. And to expand our sense of that kind of intuitive depth dimension. And what we found was that there's kind of a way that it invites being able to perceive the hidden structures and the hidden webs of connections between larger sets of things. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for a minute and just show you this kind of geeky slide of the process we used. And it's a 5-fold process. And the reason why I'm describing it a bit is to entice you to maybe check it out in Artizein, because maybe it will invite you to work with some other arts researchers. So we first curated the images we had, and then we did design guidelines about how many rounds, and we kind of played our participants' images and then had discussions. We would think of a topic or notice something emerging in our own research, play an image, and then the other person would play their image, and this could work with multiple researchers. Then we did some kind of meta-reflective free flow writing after several rounds of this, and we created an emergent network map of, and I'm just going to go to the next slide, of what that playing field looked like. And all along, we're trying to look at the edges of our perception, especially because we're dealing with just sustainability research that has this quality of having a lot of power differential and structuration hidden underneath the surface. And then our last process was to actually do intersubjective responding with each other and art making as a result of this process. This is Rachel's visualization that she developed as a response to what we experienced. And I'm going to end with a poem that arose as that was my contribution to that final art making. It's called On the Verge. Nexus of the broken, crazed, and braised curation. Knots and nodes explode us out of broken boxes. Verging, the insistence to connect. No, really the breaking through of the underlying netlings and mats, imbricating vats of vast connecting. The ribbon works of fractured seeing or ley lines, re-announcing possibilities. The subversive truth, the tendril rupture of our hallucinated isolation, returning us to intricate netting, nesting, nestling. This living world of world amanuensis fractal holes. Whether in a circle under the shade of rowan and walking onion, or in circles on sand, reweaving reclaimed plastic, we touch into the greater weavings. Through weft of flocks and stones, warp of stories and names, resurrecting bones across great spans of time, dedicated to create sanctuary for the flourishing of future beings. Let our walking, shaking, slaying of chains and remains forge a greater quaking. Realign the sublime subterranean snaking until amplified, returning to the verge of becoming, to ground and body, we can forever sense earth tendrils and human hands connecting us to justice. Just us quivering in this queer deep belly invitation to matter as we embrace this umbilical, rooted, radical, cloud weaving, evanescent, essential, net, web, braid. Thanks.
Thank you, Marna. I'd like to introduce now Alexandra Fidyk and Darlene St. George.
Thank you.
Creatrix of life, spiritus, stories of sisters and their winged companions, reverential adorations recognizable as fertile earth, universal and immediate.
Great Mother, archetypal and ancient. Fashioning her breath as butterfly, she tucked soul into our bodies, luminous amplitudes through one breath and then another.
By her we find attunement with body, with bird, and so with life. Owl is companion to the ancestors and land of hollow bone.
Related to the underside of things, secret, the unknown, and the hidden. At the edge of the mystery, there is only one world.
Born into the screech, stillness rests at the center, a little to the left. Bird of death, of winter, and of the north wind.
The memories we elude catch up to us, overtake us like a shadow. A truth appears suddenly in the middle of a thought, a hair on a lens.
Mingling with wild geraniums on terraces where street lights bend out over long, dark paths beneath sieves.
She winds her horn, perching on smooth edges, owl and raven, companions with women of northern lands.
Central to this realm and the next, other world messengers, the dark eye that sees.
Like a needle entering its field of memory, Natatasquam, wisdom.
Crone comes from crown, born of the Greek word korone, crow, raven, wise woman, midwife, grandmother, kokum. Wise counsel sought by those journeying hardships and transitions.
She belongs to the forces of innocence against plaintive doors and incorruptible memory. Memory favors one-sided telling. When we stand in between the veils at the eye to enter this time, we choose.
Clear moon, turning truth toward voice. Ancestral wisdom here unites. Wise woman and witch emerge from the same root. Voluptuous and beautiful, she has wings. Bone to bone, flesh to flesh.
Feathers worn around her wrist, the mother line, pulled tightly, glossed in the acids of cells, red.
Reddening, regeneration, a moment of turning and turning like the cosmos itself. Primary color, body, blood, birth, death.
Hum rises from the rapid vibration of wings and hearts, ripe in full color, shuttling through promises, beauty, grace, desperation.
Tender mortals in an uncharted efficacy, foretold in their creation story, shifting the night into shadows and ancestral songs. These winged familiars, woman, owl, raven, and hummingbird, share more than the sheen of light on feather. We are of the moon, clay mother. We are of the earth, earth mother. We are of the wind, soul.
Deep in tenderness, she places her whole body upon the earth, conjuring smoke of perfect circles.
We cross the veils to the north, south, east, and west, portals in all directions, allowing those marked with tender lines, soft curves, and eyes that see in the dark to fly between worlds. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra and Darlene, for taking us to that portal. Beautiful. I would like to introduce next Nicole Rallis to present on her work.
Hi there, everyone. Thank you so much. And it's going to be hard to follow the two beautiful presentations that we just experienced. So thank you for that. And I want to first also thank Barbara and Darlene for, as you described, like your nurturing guidance through the publication process. That was wonderful to have that experience with both of you. The poem I want to share is called A Two-Eyed Ode to Pacific Spirit Park. Throughout this journey, my PhD journey, I've been inspired deeply by the work of Robin Wall Kimmerer, and particularly her discussion on thinking through both eyes. And to quote one of her books, Gathering Moss, she says that a thing cannot be understood until it is known by all four aspects of our being: mind, body, emotion, and spirit. The scientific way of knowing relies only on empirical information from the world, gathered by body and interpreted by mind. We need to let matter and spirit walk companionably side by side, and sometimes even dance. So in my two-eyed ode, I wrote both the scientific names of the plants and beings I interacted with, as well as: Dear sword ferns, you grow so beautifully amongst and between the tall trees. Your bright green fronds attached to the rhizome. I marvel at your sacred geometry and thank you for your healing properties you share when my body aches. Marvelous and grand Douglas firs, awe every time I visit. Look up to the sky, you grow so tall and magnificent. I wonder of all the beings who have walked by you through the centuries. Oh, the stories and wisdom you hold. I place my hands upon you, listening. I feel the moss. I hear the songbirds. I see your cones on the forest floor, signs of life, sustenance, abundance. Dear salmon berries, I remember the first time I came across you in midsummer. Your colorful fruit caught my eye. I thought you were a raspberry. but you have your own distinct flavor and way of being. My daughter and I return to your bushes each summer to pick from your bounty. We make sure not to take too much. You are a sharing being, and remind us of the gift of generosity. Majestic big leaf maples, you grow amongst cedars and firs. Your large foliage brings us a special kind of beauty offering, the gift of life itself. I take a deep breath in, slowly exhale. In return, you breathe me in and release oxygen, a profound reciprocal exchange, unable to be properly described with language. Magical spotted owl, I hear you more than I see you. Sometimes if I look closely at the forest floor, I find your lovely feathers. You remind me of my daughter, named after a goddess, accompanied by an owl friend. Before she was born, she visited me in a dream, the most vivid, as an owl. When I hear you, I think of the dreaming world, spirit worlds. You remind me there is so much beyond what the human eye can see. Sacred bald eagles, I see you soaring above the forest, your flying wondrous dance of graceful spirals, as though you live in a liminal space, magical space, between the earth and the sun. You nest within the tallest of trees, a fierce protector of your young. I am humbled by your presence. Black-capped chickadee, lovely and tiny, you sing the most beautiful songs, composed of complex arrangements. You make me feel serene. Sometimes I think you are singing a sweet lullaby to all the forest beings. You remind me that strong and resilient beings can manifest in the tiniest of forms. Wondrous chantel mushrooms, you remind me of the importance of interspecies relationships. I wonder about the conversations you and red cedars have, your kinship inseparable. I would rather sit and look at you than eat you, so otherworldly, a pop of bright yellow amongst the bark and moss. Dear Pacific Spirit, I can feel you manifested in all the sacred forms of being found beneath and above the forest canopy, our animal cousins, plant elders, the water, earth, and wind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And while you're still there, I would also like to note that Nicole also wrote the book review, which is our first book review that we've published in Artizein. And it's a book by Adrienne, and it's entitled Constellations of Alternative Education Tutors, a Poetic Inquiry. So thank you so much for doing that review, and I encourage you to go and check it out in the journal. Thanks, Nicole. So I'd like to introduce our next presenters, Leslie C. Sotomayor and Julie M. Porterfield. I'm going to present on their co-written article.
Hello, thank you, Barbara. Okay, so Julie's and I collaborated on this article about our experiences working in the Special Collection Archives at Penn State. And I, at the time, was the instructor for an art education, diversity, pedagogy, and visual culture class, undergrad. And because Julie and I had worked together in the past using the Special Collection Archives, it was a natural team collaboration to come together. And we decided to have a creative project where we invited students to come into the special collections. We had, I believe it was 4 different sets of archives that we had pre-selected, or Julie had pre-selected, and she'll talk a little bit about that next. And we had some very broad guidelines for students to sit as small group teams and unpack what was at their table, asking themselves questions about their own lived experiences as they were going through the archives, and what are some of the things that they're making connections with, what were some of the things that they maybe felt uncomfortable by, and jot down those feelings as they were engaging with them. And so throughout that process, which was a 2-day workshop in the Special Collections Library, was also in the month of February during Black History Month. And although we were trying to be as mindful as possible, with our guided questions and facilitating of the space, we were not prepared for some of the reactions from our students and how the workshops actually played out in practice versus theory. And so I'm going to turn it over to Julie, who's going to share with us, say a little bit about the collection that we chose, the 4 different sets, and share some visual images with us. And I will say that it's a trigger warning because some of the images are violent in nature and racist in nature, and so they are explicit and hard to look at and consume. But Julie.
Thank you, Leslie. I'll go ahead and share my screen. There we go. I will just begin by saying that I am a library professional. My background is in teaching and learning and information resources, not necessarily art. And so I have found my way to be the curator of the art education collections in the Eberly Family Special Collections Library at Penn State, simply by being our education expert. So I fit the second half of that, but not necessarily the first. So I'm always excited when I get to work with a colleague like Leslie and share some of our more visual materials. Most of our research focuses on how primary sources in archives and special collections libraries can be used for critical pedagogy and how to use them to help students, have realizations about social justice and their privilege, or in some cases lack thereof. So I have a few go-to collections that I think help to leverage this. One you're looking at now, which is perhaps less visually jarring than some of the others. This one is from a suffrage organization for women here in Pennsylvania, right around the turn of the century. And so this is one of the collections we selected for the workshop, as well as the next I'll show you. Oops, maybe. I apologize. I'm having some trouble advancing my. There we go. As well as we used the Charles L. Blackson collection on African Americana and African diaspora, and that includes a large series of really, as you can see here, visually jarring racist postcards that were popular at the time. And it's always my aim to use these with students and to have them really be angry and upset about the world, right? And why things are the way that they are. But I think that in this particular case, the students' reaction was more about what happened in the classroom. And it really prompted me to step back and say, okay, what do I need to learn from this as an educator? And how can I work with my colleague to be a better educator the next time and meet the students' needs? So I'll show you one other image here. I know we don't have a lot of time. This is the back, and I like to point out that students typically notice most of all that this was used, right? So the one on the left there, you can see somebody's address and the message that they wrote, and I think for students this makes it very real. Anything I glossed over, Leslie?
No, thank you, Julie. That was fantastic. So the article that we wrote and curated together and with Barbara's guidance as well, is really about our reflections about the experiences during these workshops and our takeaways, not necessarily resolve, but things to consider in more deeper, intentional, and meaningful ways going forward as educators in our different disciplines and fields. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie and Julie, for sharing that vulnerable piece of teaching, which I think more and more we're having to wake up to, how we teach in the classroom and present material, and how do we bring that historical piece forward. with care and compassion. Thank you so much. I'd like to next introduce Celeste, Nazali Snowber, and Marsha, Nouritza, Odabashian.
Thank you, Barbara.
Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Lovely to be here in Zoom land. Marsha and I have been collaborating for a while, and we deeply connect to each other's work. And we are both descendants of Armenian genocide survivors. And we have been exploring our art forms as a way to excavate the trauma, the beauty, the culture and identity. And our collaboration here is just that. So maybe Marsha, do you want to say anything about, I'm going to read some of the work and show Marsha's amazing images. Do you want to say something, Marsha?
I'm just going to say I'm Marsha, and I'm going to let you look at the work and complete the pieces yourself and let Celeste take over.
I'm wondering, Marsha, if you just to say something about the onion skin, that these are.
What the works that I'm presenting here are all done with onion skin dye. That's the first step. And then once I have the stains on the canvas, then I pull out images. And that's all I'm going to say about it for now anyway.
All right. Thank you, Marsha. I'm going to share my screen and read you some of the work. So this is the first one, and the poem is called Fidyk and Geroges. The two words I remember are imprinted on the body. Fidyk, to kiss, Geroges, food or a meal. The two areas my mother reminded me of every day as if they were partners. Kissing the food, fooding the kiss. She was a foodie before it was hip, knowing that taste, color, texture was at the heart of loving and living. So here I am left with what is necessary. This is a poem called In Praise of the Kitchen Studio, which is about making food, love, art, dance in kitchens, which are also places of turmoil. And I'm going to come back to this if we have time because it's a longer poem. One should always dance in kitchens. I know you all know that. So this is called An Alphabet of Longing. The piece by Marsha is called Migration. And just so you get a sense of this, this is 24 inches by 48 inches. There are not enough letters in the alphabet to define the characteristics of longing, sketched into the Armenian soul, varied, complex, and complicated as the cuisine of food. The alphabet of longing has aromas which sit long after it's recognized. Even words don't express the inexpressible haunts where yearning aches in the dance of migration. I'm just always so inspired by Marsha's work that it just inspires me. This is a piece by Marsha called Milky Way Waltz, and the poem is called Dissolving All Boundaries, which also has a dance, site-specific dance in the journal that you can link to. On the other side of what cannot be seen, fragility goes wild, containing constellations, turquoise galaxies gulp, bodies within bodies, bones blast to sand, swirling in all you ever knew. Within the borderlines where skin meets sky, crying out for a third way, dissolving all boundaries. Now do I have a minute more or am I done?
No, you have lots, you have time to do that poem, Celeste, please.
Okay. All right, we will end with the kitchen dance. In praise of the kitchen studio. She created beauty in strife, aftermath of Armenian genocide, escaped, but the heart does not cease living lament of the forefathers and foremothers, the old country's legacy. At 11, she made paper roses, sold them on the streets in Cambridge, Massachusetts, brought reapings to her family. At 73, the year of her death after my father died, she was still bringing flowers to life. Nothing could stop living petals being shaped into modern art. Our kitchen was transformed into an art studio. Practices of cooking with color, creating color through sculptured objects and plant life. I have kept the tradition of my artist mother, knocked out a wall in my kitchen dining area, laid a wooden floor down, doubles as a dance, studios, torsos ecstatic. Kitchens are places of love, creating food, art, dance, exchange of hearts through flesh, and always there will be flowers. There is strife too in kitchens, tears and conflict, but connections usually win out. Ripeness of a beauty over a lifetime. We are made and remade in the kitchen studio, colors of souls brought to brilliance in ordinary living. Thank you.
Thank you, Celeste and Marsha, for bringing us into the dance.
Thank you.
Great. So we're at our last presenter, who is Adrienne Adams. So I welcome Adrienne to share her work.
Hello, everyone. How are you? I'm delighted to be here. And I have a body of work called Written in the Bones, which is looking at and examining bones to draw them to look like other things, like a cow coccyx as a face, or I have the caterpillar spine, which is in the article. And then, yeah, to look for the poetry in our bodies. So I also feel a huge connection to the land and particular places. A Sinape Writing on Stone Provincial Park in southern Alberta is one such place. And after I had sort of delved into this one body of work, I applied to draw in the restricted area in the park to draw the bones of the land. And this was like back in 2012. And when I was out there, I became very uncomfortable with my own project for a number of reasons. I'd be sitting there drawing and I kept thinking I heard like rattlesnakes everywhere when it was actually just the grasshoppers rubbing their feet together. And I couldn't relax and draw by myself because I was like terrified of being snuck up on by a snake. And in some of the tours in the restricted area, you have to register to go on tours with guides who are, especially nowadays, Blackfoot or Blackfoot elders. And some of them had talked about specific areas of the wall. And I sort of got the impression that I shouldn't be drawing them for whatever reason. And I felt both a little bit defiant and puzzled and like guilt and shame at the time because I had this huge connection with the land. I felt drawn to explore the bones of the earth and what they have to say. And yet I sort of had this clash encounter. And so I abandoned the work for many years. And then I actually was having a discussion with Barbara one day about it. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to write an article about it. I have no idea if it would be accepted because I haven't written an academic article in like 20 years or something. So I was like learning how to write an article as then I decided to use it as a process of editing a poem that I wrote back then called My Own Drum, which became Editing My Own Drum, or no, which became, that's the name of the article, which became One Drum, Many Voices. And to look at the language I used as a way of examining my own attitudes, because I've done through my work a lot of research into sort of reconciliation and have learned a lot more about, you know, ethical relationality and Indigenous cultures, learned a lot more through the research I did for this article, the work of Robin Walk Kimmerer and like Sean Wilson, Research as Ceremony, the Indigenous Style Guide by Gregory Younging. And the article itself was quite a collaboration between my readers, Teresa Malley, who's a Métis friend of mine and does a lot of historical writing. Barbara and Darlene both gave feedback. I sent the article to Dr. Dwayne Donald out of the U of A, who is an Indigenous scholar there. And he asked me a bunch of questions more than gave me answers, which really made me relook at the article. And I was looking at my language. Like, for instance, the term native is no longer, like, it's not respectful to use that term. And generally it's only used nowadays as referring to native plants. And so I changed the wording in the poem. I changed some of the gender pronouns. I questioned the use of the word tribe and a few other things. And it kind of became a process for looking at my relationship to language, to thought, and to the land. And Dr. Donald particularly asked me about renewal and what is my relationship to the land itself. And I was sort of looking at trying to connect with elders to get them to look at the article and to look at my work. Struggling with this idea of being a settler and whether I have a right to do work in a sacred Blackfoot place, such as Asinapi is. And so it's quite a process. And I feel like, as Dr. Donald said, you know, colonization was like over 100-year process. So the idea of decolonizing or unlearning and that whole process with your own language, with your own practice, like it's probably going to take, you know, at least another 100 years, right? So I feel like this is a start. I wanted to write the article in a way to inspire other people. It has several pictures and quotes. Dr. Leroy Littlebear in particular, I read that article and I was struggling because I feel often like, I'm going to share my screen now, like the stones speak to me and I end up having a conversation with them. And I realized as I was drawing that that's part of why I'm prone to drawing. And this is some drawings I did in situ on site this past summer of sort of a mother-daughter maiden crone. And I'll show you the finished pieces in a little bit. Well, I'll show you the mushroom grandfather. There's a picture that I drew of it in the article, but you can, this is sort of I mentioned him in the poem, or them in the poem, and sort of one of the first conversations I had with the stones and the land there. And as Dr. Donald reminds us, it's important to say that Indigenous people do not have copyright on ecology. There are people all around the world who have their own traditions and own ways of doing it. And just because you're not Indigenous doesn't mean you don't have access to this or an understanding of this. There's examples all around the world. This is a human desire that we have to try to connect in these ways, and that not to make it about a particular people or a particular propensity, to make sure that they understand that this is a shared human desire. And one of the things that I struggled with during the project was this idea that the stones speak to me. And oh my God, people are gonna think I'm crazy if I talk about stones speaking to me. And through the process of writing the article, I realized that that is actually a colonial attitude in and of itself. The idea that the land and the earth speaks to us. And so that helped me get rid of some of my shame. And I was like, yeah, I don't have to, you know, even my own like Celtic and Slavic ancestors would have had a very different idea of our relationship with the land. So through it, I've sort of started to own my own relationship with the land and develop it more. And Sokokoto was the elder out there this summer that I connected with the guides, and he had talked about, I'd brought some tobacco that I had grown in my garden, and he actually asked me to offer it from me and from him to the land itself. And so I did a little ceremony with that. And so I finished these pieces. You sort of saw the unfinished pieces earlier, and then this shows the energy of the lines and the relationship. And so I think I'll end with worship, but I end the article by saying my efforts seem to have borne fruit. On the day after the last full harvest moon in early September 2020, I was visited by a bright sun and new leaf colored butterfly that came to rest on my torso while I was drawing, then by a female deer nibbling among the berry bushes. Emerging from my drawing conversation with the stones, there was a double rainbow spawning the valley, which I have an image of in the article. Nothing has ever felt more like a beautiful blessing from the land to me and my work than this. I am thankful to Na'a, which is Mother Earth in Blackfoot, and Asanapi for these gifts. I've been going out there for over 10 years. I'd never seen a rainbow ever, never mind a double rainbow. So I'll share an image of that image. Actually, that was such an incredible experience and felt like such a huge blessing. I'll finish with the poem Worship, but I encourage you to read, because it's quite short, but I encourage you to read Colonial Reread, which is at the end of the article and has some of my findings. And then there's also a video of me reading another poem called When She Was Alone. This poem Worship is actually written about Nose Hill, which is in Mohkinstsis here in Calgary. But I feel like it really speaks to this idea of renewal and the relationship with the land. So worship. And I realize that my way of praying is touching the earth, that there is something sacred about the strength in my legs that carries me up this mount, something of a sermon in the width and sturdiness of my thighs that opens up when I praise pleasure with sky-high cries. Something about this that makes my heart beat with more than the exertion and exhilaration of being up on this hill. And when I stop, I see a pasque flower, bright in my favorite hue. Reborn again, I am sitting, feeling the warmth of this earth mound radiating up my veins. As the sun sets and the moon rises, I know that worship is something you more feel with your heart than say. Just say thank you to you all for being here and sharing that with me.
Thank you, Adrienne. I'd like to acknowledge, as we come to a close here, a couple of the article authors who are not able to be here. So I'm just going to share their names as well as their title of their pieces. One is Adrienne Downey and Gonan Sagi, and their piece was Conversations with Each Other, Love Songs to the Earth. And the other is a closing piece in the journal by Peter London called Art, the Language We Use When There Is Nothing We Can Say. And so with that, I'd like to thank all the authors. I'm going to field any questions that might come from those of you who are attending, and maybe some questions have arisen for you while you've been listening to these amazing, a lot of poetry and a lot of stories of tackling troubling areas. So yeah, we welcome questions and comments from folks within the panel themselves and also from the attendees. So I'd like to open for that. And we'll have about 10 minutes for questions. So I'm just seeing some of the comments coming in. One from Lynn Fowles, a wonderful sharing that reminds me of the joy of reimagining scholarship with care, love, and compassion. So here's a question from Michael Fisher. This is for anyone. How has heat or fire entered your work? Here's a good one for you. How has heat or fire entered your work? That's for any of the panelists.
You know,
I can-
the first thing I think is that it's not about entering the work, it's about igniting the work. It's like the heat is the midwife to the work.
I can speak to that in the sense that working on at Isanapi is like, it's often so hot out there. So the pieces on wood that I drew 2 different settings actually, and I literally draw until I knew I would faint from heat stroke, unless I got off the hoodoos. So you know, there is an element to the sacred, like it's like the earth, the land really tests you when you're out there too. So it'd be nice to finish entire pieces out there, but it's a testament of endurance.
Extreme. Any other responses to that? I have another question that's come in.
I just want to
Oh,
quickly.
did you have one?
Yeah,
Yes.
just a quick response or an acknowledgement of Celeste's notion as the heat as the midwife. So beautiful. It reminds me of Letters to a Young Poet when Rainier Rilke talks about everything in gestation. And I think pairing the idea of heat to that is really beautiful. So thank you.
Right. So this is a question for Marna from Susan Jarofsky. So Marna, Susan's asking, can you say more about playing the images?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Susan. That's a great question. Yeah, so what we did is we each decided that we were going to select, in this case, 6 images from our data, because we both had data that was visual. Like our participants had created, in one case, collages, in another case, they wove things out of garbage that they found on their walk. And so we had these images, and then we started around, we would start around and someone would play an image, which means just literally putting it down on this field that was going to become the web of interconnected data. So we'd play the image and then say why we were playing it, you know. Part of the guidelines is kind of creating some meta questions that drive the, you know, our inquiry, our joint collaborative inquiry. So the first person plays something and then says something about what that picture is evoking about maybe a problem, you know, a challenge, an issue, a question that's still niggling, or an emerging theme from that person's research. And then that sparks, to use the heat metaphor, the next person kind of playing some of their data that connects to that. And the idea is that it opens up, and it certainly happened for me, it opened up fresh perspectives for me looking at the data and experiencing it. I don't know, does that help, Susan? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's gamification for sure. Yeah.
Right. And that you as 2 researchers were co-inquiring based on both of your research, and you were playing with each other's images.
Yes. And
Yeah,
so the thing is, because I wasn't there when Rachel's data was emerging from her participants, I could kind of play with it with a little bit of a fresh perspective because I wasn't as embedded inside of it. And then that evoked more context for her and what it might mean to others encountering it. So it was really kind of cool. 3rd and 4th and 5th ripple resonances with the data. Yeah.
And I love your comment, Susan, that you make about you feel like all of the presenters today have been playing the images of their pieces. And I would say that's true. They each had to distill, you know, their beautiful, much longer pieces into this 5-minute capsule. So yeah, thank you all for playing your images.
There's another cool looking question there from Elizabeth Cormier.
Okay, got it. So Darlene and Alexandra, I was curious about your collaborative process. Please tell us more.
Darlene, do you want to say anything first?
Well, I think we should root it in, you know, how we got started in the first place. And, you know, that was a connection with birds. And it sparked something for both of us. We chose collaboratively 3 birds to focus on. I think I nudged that a little because of the artwork, but we both felt a connection with crow, raven, and then it extended outward from there. That very important relationship with other and other than human. And so we started exploring there. And it really was a back and forth experience. In terms of our presentation here, we extracted and we created something new. We extracted imagery and poems, words and fragments of the poetry that's in our article and the writings, and created something new, which was surprising and very generative, right, Alex?
Yeah. And I suppose I want to pull up the word archaeomythology from the original piece, the layers that we worked from various forms of amplification in that first piece. And then in this one, we both were very surprised how generative it was and sparky. It was late after we'd both put in long days of work, and we just started to go through the original piece and pull lines and start to weave them. And that in itself was generative and invigorating. And then we just continued to layer and build. Just as the images, if you look at the original text of Darlene's work, these two are like that. They're amplified snippets of the original work, and yet the images are completely different. And then when we looked back, we realized there was also a coupling between the image and the text that was unintentional, but yet it actually appeared there when we looked back.
Mm-hmm. And I found it so interesting that it generated yet another story.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. And they were curious about your medium, Darlene.
Oh, for the original images in the article, I worked with Photoshop. So I call that work that I do photo digital collage. So I bring in images, my own images, paintings, drawings, etc. And I work through Photoshop. Again, similar to the process that Alex described in our writing and our collaboration, that kind of collage process and creating a new image from that. And as you can tell, the colors are super colorful, which is an extension of my painting practice. I'm mesmerized by, at this point in my painting practice, I'm mesmerized by really bright colors, and it triggers my imagination, and it just gets me very excited.
Us too. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, the beautiful colors. Nicole, there's a question for you from Michael Fisher. What was it like putting Latin names with the organisms?
It was a very new experience for me. I don't have any training or background in biology or botany or the sciences. So I really enjoyed that learning process of starting from the creative and trying to gather a better understanding of the world around me as seen through the scientific perspective. So I actually recently bought their playing cards of all the native plant species of the Pacific Northwest, and I do walking practices with my daughter multiple times a week, and we bring the cards with us to try and identify, and it's a really playful and generative experience, kind of going and oscillating between both of the worlds and realizing they're married.
Yeah, nice. Thanks, Nicole. I know we're coming to a close here. I just wanted to make a connection for me that came through listening to all this, and it's totally lovely to hear these presentations. I have to say, it's just a real treat as an editor to actually have you all come to life from the paper and the email back and forth. So I was just aware of all the pieces having really portals. Portals through the land, portal through the verge, portal through food, and then the portal, you know, that Julie and Leslie opened up to history, and the risk of that, as well as the beauty. that can come out of that. I don't know if you want to speak just briefly to that, Julie, around that portal into history and that experience of that.
Sure. So one of the things, that we, in our reflection, that we realized was how important contextualizing these documents are for students for that very reason, right? Like, we were really thinking of it as a portal to history, but without that context of what that history is, it's sometimes not always as useful or as meaningful, but maybe meaningful in a negative way. So yeah, I mean, I do this all the time with different types of primary sources with students. And I think that it's just led me to really understand that everybody's personal history is a little bit different. And my portal to history may be different than the portal to that person's personal history, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Well, thank you all. Any final closing words or gestures? I see Celeste doing a beautiful gesture, bringing us back to our body as we come to a close. I'd like to thank all the authors and for all of you that attended and asked great questions and made comments. So the contributions of this journal issue are a telling of stories of a self and relation that invite us to consider an embodied and inspirited way of being and becoming in the world. We invite you to wander through this issue and find sacred spaces for moments of pause, questioning, and reflection within your own life as artists, teachers, and learners. Darlene has transmuted the piece into a hard journal if you want to have a hard copy in your hand. I'm excited. Mine's coming in the mail.
Thank you. I'll show you my copy that came in. It's quite beautiful. It's nice and thick. And it's all in full color. Let me get some images here. We'll look at, let's see, that beautiful, well, let's look at Peter London's work, right? So beautiful. Those are Peter London's paintings.
Gorgeous.
So the quality is just gorgeous. So the way that you can find this, if you'd like to purchase a copy, again, I'll share the screen. All you have to do is go on MagCloud and just do a search. All you have to do is type in Artizein and it'll bring it up. It's right here, and it brings up the past issues as well. And as Barbara said, she put the link in chat, so you have access to that. Thank you, Barbara.
Thanks, Darlene. We're going to close, Darlene and I are going to close with a few stanzas from Carl Lago's poem, which is also in our editorial introduction. And following that, we're going to play a piece of music from Vicki Kelly, who is also in an earlier journal issue playing her flute. And she's unable to be with us tonight, but we're grateful for her contributing the music, which will send us off from this lovely launch evening together.
Thank you. I'm just so honored to have this opportunity to work collaboratively with Barbara. Barbara, you're amazing. Thank you for trusting in me to be on this journey with you, and to all of you for participating and all the heart that you put in there. I know Carl would be so impressed with this presentation. And in that note, I start with Carl's calling to educators to consider what it means to be human in creation, what it means to live in relationship with all of creation, what it means to resonate with voice. And these two stanzas from his poem I'd like to share. If I can believe in an invisible net of worldwide interconnections in cyberspace, surely I can believe in the ecology of words and lines of care born lightly in the heart, even the unbearable. I will hold my friends through blustery winds of winter into promises of spring, as I know they will hold me in blood-beating heart and imagination and memory beyond all counting of tense time, in tenderness only. Thank you,
Thank you.
Carl.
Thank you, Darlene. So thank you again to all of our beautiful authors, and thanks to the ones who presented last week and all those that have joined us in this celebratory launch and for the conversation. Thank you. So I'm going to close with sharing Vicky's flute music. So I'm going to do the screen share, and we can all sit and listen at the end and then say our goodbyes. Thank you all so much for coming. And hello, Tina. To see you. Thank you all. And thank you all for attending. And enjoy going off and reading that journal. You've got the links, and enjoy it. And it's sad to actually say goodbye now that the second launch is over. But yeah, look forward to future connections in many other ways with each of you.